Hi everyone. I'm Judith Schmitz, and I'm very excited to welcome you here at the Leuphana Social-Ecological Systems Institute with, I believe, the 5th installment of our Global Conversations seminar series. The Institute brings together researchers with diverse backgrounds and projects, and with this seminar series, we'd like to share our work with you, exchange ideas, and hopefully together start a global conversation about social ecological systems. So today we're gonna hear from Sarah Gottwald, Iga Kołodyńska, and Christopher Raymond about the census of place and mobilities nexus. So welcome, guys. And afterwards, we will get the chance to discuss any questions and ideas, thoughts that you guys might have. So just a quick word about the logistics. We will record the presentation section of this meeting, but not the discussion afterwards. And if you'd like to say something, please feel free to use the virtual hand raising option or just write in the chat. But yeah, without further ado, Sarah, I believe the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, Judith. Welcome everybody to the global conversations of the Social-Ecological Systems Institute here at Leuphana. I hope you can see the presentation all right. So today's session topic is on census of place and mobilities nexus within dynamic social-ecological systems. And I'm very happy to welcome two guest speakers today. And one is Iga Kołodyńska, who is a landscape architect from the Wrocław University of Environmental and Life Science, and who together with me lead the Move and Sense project, which is on the nexus of census of place and mobilities in border regions. And we'll present today some first results on a literature review on this nexus. And our second guest is Professor Christopher Raymond, who's also an advisor at our project and a sustainability scientist at the Helsinki Institute of Sustainability Science in Helsinki in Finland. And he will present us a broader picture of census of place and global challenges, and also related to a book published together with other colleagues last year. My name is Sarah Gottwald. I'm a geographer and environmental planner working here at the SESI Institute at Leuphana. And yes, as Judith has mentioned, we thought to divide this session up into parts. So first we will give some input and some thoughts that we have, and then in the second half we would like to discuss. So we would ask you to hold your thoughts and comments to the second half, and please feel free to use the chat, but we would also like to hear your voice later on. Yes, and I would like to take you directly to a place which is in our study region at the Odra River, at the German-Polish border. And the Guardian was titling this summer that there has been a mystery mass die-off of fish population in the river. So the mystery by now has been partially solved, and we know that the anthropogenic activities have mainly led to the situation by high soil concentration through industrial activities, high nutrient load through agricultural production, but also in general through climate change and the way we manage the river through constructions, embankments, diking, wetland drainage, which led to very unusually high water temperatures, that there were created partial backwaters, so areas where the water would not move at all, and in general the water flow was very low, which led to an overpopulation of some algae, which basically poisoned the fish population of the river. So then this change, what we see here, so this ecological catastrophe, is not just happening, but is perceived by people, and also potentially impacts the relation they have to a place through the way they see the place, but also how they can interact with the place. And here we see a little picture of a fence. So there were areas that have been fenced off because you're not allowed to swim in the river, and others were just having little warning signs advising you not to go swimming there or not even take your dog there. So how the system changes is how we also, our interaction with the system is impacted. At the same time, and here we have a map of the Polish-German border, and part of the Oder River is just west of Berlin, so it's just a tiny part. At the same time this is happening, there are around every day 90,000 border crossings happening in this part of the border. So this border is also crossed by the trucks and trains that ship the industrial and agricultural goods, but also people that commute or seasonally migrate for work, that has contributed all to this situation that we were facing this summer at the Oder River. So there's a high connection of our mobilities and how the places are shaped. But also mobility exposes us to different places. And here we can see, this is the main bridge in Frankfurt-Oder, so where we can cross from Poland to Germany and vice versa. And from where we could see then the situation that we had of this fish population, for instance. But also you can take other forms of mobility, like virtual mobilities, which has spread the news about this fact. And I would like to end this very short introduction by a quote from Doreen Massey, who was a pioneer of pushing to understand this nexus and this relation between senses of place and mobility, saying what we need, it seems to me, is a global sense of the local, a global sense of place. And what that means, that we need to look, when we look at one place, we need to look at places beyond, because when we move from one place to the other, we carry the places of our origin, the transition, and the destination. And with this, I'd like to hand over to Chris, who will give us a more bigger picture of senses of place and global challenges. So I will stop my here.
Thanks, Sarah. Yes, I'll just move to this and share my screen. Just change the display. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to present today. I'm going to give a bit of a global perspective, drawing upon some recent insights from a book that was published last year on global senses of place, navigating global challenges. And I noticed that Timo is also in the audience today, so he can certainly relate to a number of the ideas that I talk about. Yeah, so back like last year, Lynn Manzo, Dan Williams, Andreas, Timo and I, we published the book with a 3-year effort during the pandemic to think about how do we understand sense of place and new ideas around senses of place in the face of environmental change, among other global challenges. And the question that we tried to answer through this book is, how do we navigate the contested forces of stability and change in a world influenced by multiple interconnected global challenges? By global challenges here, I'm not only talking about issues of migration and belonging, such as what we've seen in recent years in terms of mass migration from the southern parts of the world through to Europe, or issues of even within country asylum seeking. But I'm also talking about rapid climate change and ecological regime shifts, including more frequent and intense bushfires in some parts of the world. But I'm also talking about technological and legal transformation resulting from how our lives are changing, e.g. through Zoom or other forms of online communication, or geospatial navigation like Google Maps, or electronic banking, that all having fundamental influences on how we see and relate to places in the world. So what we're saying here is that our concepts of place need to change or be conceptually revisited, given that our experiences of places are changing. And so what we're arguing for in this book is to rethink how to theorize and conceptualize changes in senses of place. So notice the pluralization of sense and the problematization of place in the face of global challenges that are rapidly moving ecosystem thresholds and altering the social fabric of global societies. So that's in contrast to this historical context on place, which has come from this subfield of geography, which emphasized the essential nature of place, that has some essential qualities that we tend to associate place as a center of being, as a locus of attachment and a meaning, and that those attachments grow with time of residence in place. But what we start to see in this book is perhaps we can also have connections to and attachments to places that are changing. And how do we accommodate for that in our conceptualization of senses of place is critical. So in the traditional understanding or the essentialist tradition around senses of place, we assume that place is bounded, it's localized, it's fixed, and it's subjectively experienced. So it assumes some level of insularity and stability of place and highlights the authentic qualities of place. And it's often promoted in fields such as architecture and planning, where we're trying to plan and design for the essential qualities of a given place. This has progressed from the 2010 onwards, where we've seen this move from a very essentialist view to a more progressive relational approach, emphasizing a systemic perspective on sense of place, such as places not being fixed, but produce free flows and mobilities, in addition to power relations. So bringing the place contestation and power into the discussion in place. And also grappling with the influence of systems thinking, including social-ecological systems thinking, spanning natural and social sciences. And Vanessa's work on that has been instrumental in this field. So then the question is, well, how do we start to think about changing senses in the face of changing places? And by changing senses, we think about the different ways in which people understand, interpret, and interface with the world, involving multiple sensibilities, physical senses, and embodied identities. So by sensibilities, we refer to the ability to perceive stimuli, mental or emotional responsiveness in a given place. The physical senses, ability to touch, see, hear, smell, or taste. And our embodied identities include a deeper understanding of our bodily awareness. So that's including ideas around mindfulness, meditation, and presence in landscapes. What we argue in this book is that the new patterns of social spatial relationships and experiences of place, driven by environmental change, among other global challenges, means that our experiences of placeness are resignified or rescaled or revalued in different ways. And for example, a chapter in the book talked about the issues of reef grief as a result of sudden loss of coral reef on the sudden loss and bleaching of coral on the Great Barrier Reef in Australia. That's one example of how relationships to place can be resignified. So what then do we mean by changing what is senses of place? The senses of place, as defined in the book, is the plurality of place-related meanings, interpretations, and values that are continuously produced, contested, negotiated, reconstructed, and embodied by individuals and among collectives of people in relation to changing physical, social, political, and ideational environments. Often these dynamic bonds are nested or embedded in other places of smaller or larger scales and are contextualized with reference to different understandings of time and space. So, for example, when we're talking about climate change, people have different views around when the impacts of those changes will be and how those impacts will be manifested on the landscape. Yet, we also recognise as a cautionary note that we do not suppose a singular character of any place. We recognise there's plurality of meanings. We know also not nostalgic or romantic about an unchanging past, and that we recognise the need to both navigate fixity, and so these essentialist qualities, and fluidity in people-place connections. And we need to embrace an epistemic attitude that is sensitive to knowledge co-production, and we recognise the various ways that place experiences are changing in today's world. So I'll finish off just clarifying why senses of place. We all know that global challenges are accelerating, intensifying, and expanding. And arguably, this is creating a fluidity in senses of place. And so these senses of place are becoming more salient in our lives. Senses of place is also a powerful lens to translate large and complex global challenges into multiple consequences relevant to local communities. And it reminds us that scholarship on people-place relations is much more variable, contested, and fluid than is often recognised in sense of place scholarship. So in conclusion, any attempt to understand or to intervene across global challenges will be deficient if senses of place are ignored. And we need to rethink the way we understand relations through senses of place and develop new capacities to navigate ruptures and new beginnings in the face of rapid changes that we're experiencing through different challenges in the world. So I'll leave it there, and thank you very much. I'll just stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Chris. And so we will now hear from Iga about the nexus of mobilities and senses of place.
Yes, exactly. Just let me start the presentation. Yeah, can you see it now? Okay, great. So as it was said, I will focus on the relationship between senses of place and mobilities, and I will present to you the preliminary results from our systematic literature review. So Chris gave us already a wide background of the development of senses of place. So I will just deliver a short definition that we apply to our study. We understand senses of place as emotional connection to place. This is an overarching construct which includes evaluating place attachment as well as descriptive place meanings. We studied mobilities using 6 interdependent mobility types based on the typology by Buscher and Uri. And it includes daily movements, tourism, migration, immobility, reconfiguration of place, meaning place change or landscape change, and virtual imaginative travel and communication. I'm aware that immobility is not a mobility type itself. However, every time we decide to move, we can also decide to stay. And in that sense, it's also highly related to senses of place. There have been few conceptualizations of the nexus, and I would like to emphasize the recent work by Di Masso and others, which significantly contributes to the ongoing debate and inspired our research. Yet empirical application is still missing, and in preparation of that, we are carrying out the literature review. My today's presentation will explore and structure the dominant debates on the nexus, which we understand as the relationship between senses of place and mobilities. Firstly, I will present how our senses of place understood within different mobility types. Secondly, I will come to how our mobilities and senses of place related. And finally, I will present to you the underexplored areas for research and new research possibilities. Our literature review consists of 4 phases. In the first phase, we applied the search query to Web of Science search engine. In the second, we screened the abstracts and excluded papers which were not empirical papers focused on the nexus. In the third, we read the full papers to select the final number for further analysis. Empirical papers that we studied are distributed unevenly across the world. They come mostly from North America, Europe, China, and Australia. This bias can be also caused by the number of migration studies that come from those countries. There is a great variety of disciplines which study the nexus, and they are represented quite evenly. And among the terms used for people-place relationships, place attachment is significantly dominating. Among different mobility types, migration is the most studied and virtual travel the least studied one. I was also surprised with the number of tourism studies related to senses of place. To study senses of place contexts, we use the framework based on Gustafsson 2001 and Raymond and others from 2010. So we have this harmonious triangle of personal, community, and place context, and we extended by coupling categories and tripartite context, which is covering all three contexts. So we crossed the mobility types with senses of place contexts, and for each mobility type, we studied the most dominating context. So for migration, that was a tripartite context, and studies coming from this category were mostly focused on longing for landscape, on migration as flows of privileged individuals, education migration in relation to senses of place developed by students, and also forced relocation related to war or natural disasters. Tourism was mostly studied in the personal and place context, and those papers often related to tourism marketing, revisiting tourist destination, but also achieving environmentally responsible behavior for tourists and relationship between tourism and senses of place in the context of changing landscapes. Mixed mobility types were studied in the tripartite context. For example, migration was studied together with immobility, investigating the human choice, whether to move or not to move, and how do senses of place influence those choices. Or mixed mobility types were studied in certain geographical context. Daily movement was studied also in a tripartite context, and those studies often referred to the use and satisfaction of public transport mediated by place attachment, senses of place produced by activities by various social groups, and also the process of the development of the relationship between the residents and the landscape. Immobility was also studied in the tripartite context mostly, and those papers refer to resisting to move from area of natural disasters, resisting climate change migration, but also staying processes in rural neighborhoods. What I think is worth mentioning here that immobility might be often associated with inability to move. However, it was also seen by the researchers as a dynamic, multi-phased and nuanced staying process. So every time, so as a conscious choice that I can move, but I'll decide to stay, and this choice can be reconsidered at different life stages. A reconfiguration of place was studied in personal and place context. For example, emotional responses to environmental changes caused by tourist development, natural disasters, and also related to environmental grief. Virtual imaginative travel and communication was studied mostly in personal context. For example, as the relationship between senses of place and decision to visit places by virtual reality, but also connecting with nature via webcams in lockdown. So finally, I come to the to investigating the how our senses of place and mobilities related. So we came up with that push and pull framework, which was inspired by Di Masso fixes and flows. And we basically we based it on 4 categories, which we applied to the literature review, which were easy to apply. First is push and resist. So there is a push factor pushing us away from where we are, and we resist to move. So this is the situation related to centeredness, rootedness, persistence, and immobility. Second category is push and pull. So there is a push factor which is pushing us away, but there is also a pull factor which is pulling us towards the new location. And this is related or understood as disruption and placelessness. So in that sense, senses of place and mobilities are seen as contradiction. So there is also a pull and resist. So there is a pull factor, but we decide to stay and pull category, which is a situation where we are pulled towards different locations, and it's related to this cosmopolitan lifestyle, so we can harmoniously manage all those, our senses of place between those locations. So we studied dominating modes of interaction within each mobility type. And for migration, I think that's important to carefully emphasize that there is a voluntary migration and forced migration. And that difference is also pictured in the interaction modes, because the pull and pull will be characteristic rather for a voluntary migration, while the push and pull category is typical for forced migration. Pull and pull is generally dominating for tourism, mixed mobility types, daily movement, and virtual travel and communication. For immobility, this is rather push and resist. And for reconfiguration and of place studied without any other mobility types, this will be not relevant. So coming to the conclusions, among all mobility types, migration is the most, and virtual travel the least researched mobility type in relation to senses of place. From all senses of place contexts, community context and place context are the least researched ones on their own in relation to mobility. Physical characteristics of place are often overlooked or described briefly and rather rarely studied in relation to senses of place and mobility nexus. And the studies investigating mobility within cross-border study regions in relation to senses of place are missing. So we were kind of hoping that we can fish out those during our literature review, because we are carrying out the project in a cross-border study region ourselves, but that was not possible. So just at the end of the presentation, investigating the nexus feels sometimes to us like we are grasping the water, and we realize that the nexus is dynamic and relational, or maybe that's not a nexus, but the whole landscape of nexuses. And I'm aware that we are researchers from different backgrounds and we have different views on common definition. Therefore, I would like to invite you to discuss and to share your suggestions, remarks, your comments, your reflections, and your own experiences with the nexus with us today. And I was speaking on behalf of the Move and Sense project team. Thank you very much for your attention.